Bet you didn't see this. Anthony Fauci should be hanging from a tree.
January the 26th of 2020, this is before we had our first tragic death of coronavirus in the United States.
So Anthony Fauci was questioned today all about COVID and the crimes that he committed against literally humanity. And I watched the entire thing so that you don't have to. And I pulled away the 9 most important parts I feel that you need to know, and stick around for that 9th one because it is by far the most important one. If you're watching this and you were also one of those people who made COVID political and you attacked family members or you attacked friends or you lost relationships or whatever the case may be, okay? Because I remember those days. I will never forget those days. The amount of times I was called a racist or a hateful person or a bigot, or the amount of times I was accused of literally killing people. The amount of dirty looks that I got when I walked through an airport confidently without a mask, knowing that it was an absolute psyop and that the government was completely lying to us, and knowing everything that we now know to be true, but being called a liar for it. The people calling for me to be canceled, for my platform, all of my content being throttled and me being shadow banned and my business being affected and all of the things that happened, my family being attacked, all of these things. I remember those things and I will never forget them. And I'm not going to ask you for forgiveness, and I'm not going to say I told you so. I'm just simply going to ask you that as you watch these clips to reflect and to consider where you stood and what you were saying and what you were doing during that time. And maybe just consider the fact that we are absolutely not each other's enemies, but that these people want us to believe we are. Because again, this is nothing but political theater, and I'm going to prove it to you at the end of this. But until then, I just want you to understand, it's us versus them. They don't care about us on either side of the aisle. This is the most important video you're going to watch today.
You wrote, it now appears using EpiData that the genomic data, the first infection was in early December and was not connected to the market, which was the big rumor that was out there. It was this wet market in China. We know the market was not the source, it was the amplifier. On January the 31st, you wrote about a phone call. You wrote, the people on the phone felt the mutations around the furin cleavage site of the spike protein could not have occurred naturally, since it would require an evolutionary jump that they found nowhere in bat isolates. They bring up the possibility this could have been deliberately inserted and either accidentally released or deliberately released by a crazy person in the lab, the former being the most likely.
Yeah, so he knew that the origin of COVID was not this wet market. And yet, what did he say for literally years?
Look at the animal-human interface and the fact that animals from the wild are being brought into wet markets.
You have animals that come out of the wild that are sold at these open, what they call them, wet markets.
Wet markets, where you bring animals in from the wild who have these viruses.
The wet markets in Asia, where people bring animals from the forest into market. There are wet markets in Wuhan that are ample opportunity for a virus to jump from an animal. The origin was from a bat to an intermediate host to a human, very likely in a wet market.
And those animals should not have been in the Wuhan market. They knew that those animals should not have been in the market, and they immediately cleaned out the market, put restrictions on the kinds of animals that come into these wet markets. I think they should shut down those things right away. I mean, it boggles my mind.
Listen, what I want you to understand as you watch this, I am not coming at this from a place of, sides or political parties. This is all just political theater. Let's just be very clear, and I will prove that point at the end of this video. So stick around. But that being said, I want you guys to understand the gravity of the situation with COVID. Think about all of the people who died. Think about all the people who are sick. And think about all the terrible things that happened as far as families being separated, people having to watch their loved ones literally die from a window and not being able to see them in the hospital. People not being able to attend extremely important events in their childhood, or prom or graduation or any of these things, or kids being masked and having insane developmental issues for their entire lives and being slower to develop, and just all of the insane things that happened during that time that didn't have to happen. But because of this hearing, we now know so clearly happened because of the selfishness and the immorality and the lack of integrity and, quite frankly, the evil of one man and the people who defended him and the people who continued to allow him to do the things that he did. That's what this is about. And to prove to you that I am absolutely coming from that place, this next clip is literally John Fetterman. And I never thought I would say that I agree with John Fetterman, but I do. What he said is so incredibly important. Listen to this.
It's not about much more your regrets, but I have one. And that is early on that there was the theory that the virus could have emerged from the lab. And early on that became like a right-wing kinds of theory. And I thought it seemed to make sense. Now, there was a really advanced lab that was close by, and then you have this unknown virus out. So, but that became a very partisan thing. And now it seems now it's more and more emerging theory that that would have come from the lab. Now, I think that the next time our nation's facing something like this, we are not become, as I might have been, blinded by the partisan idea that maybe the truth might come from a side that's different than you are. But I think we should really be willing to pursue truth, no matter where that may have emerged, for all of that. So, and I now cede the remain back to the chair. Thank you.
All of these people lied to you, and they pitted you against your family, your friends, and your fellow Americans. And they used you as a weapon, and they got rich while they did it. Just consider that as you watch this.
You wrote in support of this in the Washington Post, and you said, even if a scientist is bitten, even if a pandemic should occur, the knowledge is worth the risks. Do you still stand by that? Would you like to qualify at all whether or not the knowledge of gain of function is worth the risks, particularly in this case, since we now know 15 million people died worldwide? Many people believe this came from the lab. Do you think that the risks really are worth the benefits for gain of function research?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Dr. Fauci literally declined to answer all of the questions. He didn't answer a single question. He answered every single question by saying that, including all of these.
I'll kind of combine the questions into kind of one, but I certainly, let's put up the last COVID chart. I was warned pretty early on about the dangers of the experimental gene therapy that you've called a vaccine, but it really falls under the definition of gene therapy. So I was going to ask you, were you carefully monitoring the safety surveillance systems like VAERS and vSafe that literally were deluged with complaints? Currently, worldwide, there have been almost 1.7 million adverse events reported to the VAERS system. Of those, over 39,000 were deaths. And of those deaths, 24% occur on the day of vaccination within 1 or 2 days. 24%, which, by the way, just happens to be the same percentage that a Rasmussen poll pointed out the American public believe 24% of the American public believe they know somebody who died of the experimental gene therapy. Were you ever made aware of the fact that Peter Marks was warned that the algorithm was going to hide the safety signals? And were you told that senior FDA officials were given shown dozens of safety signals associated with the COVID injection?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
And then when it comes to ivermectin, which, by the way, because I was contacted by so many people, I referred them to doctors who actually had the courage and compassion to treat vaccine-injured individuals. It works. But I was going to ask you whether you were involved in the FDA attack on ivermectin. You had a interview on CNN on August 29th of 2021, where, again, I just don't want to take time to find the exact quote, but you said there's no evidence that ivermectin is helpful. On that exact same day, and I've got the studies right here. There was a website that was tracking the random controlled studies. Here they are, showing 60, 70% efficacy of ivermectin. The same day you say there's no evidence, there was all kinds of evidence. Loved ones had to go to hospitals, had to sue hospitals. Just, would you try it? So I would want to know, to what extent were you involved in sabotaging hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and did you do that because you knew the only way you get emergency use authorization for these drugs, these experimental gene therapy, was if there was no effective treatment, you couldn't get the emergency use authorization. So is that why you helped sabotage these cheap generic drugs in favor of remdesivir, which, by the way, are you aware of the fact that nurses called it run, death is near?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
But I think I know why you're doing it. It's because you don't want to answer questions. It's because you did all kinds of terrible things. It's because during the pandemic you got rich, didn't you? You got rich while people were dying, hundreds of thousands of Americans, over 1 million in the end, and you were getting rich. And not only were you doing that, you were using federal employees with taxpayer money to apply for and solicit cash prizes for you personally. cash prizes totaling over $1 million. You did all of that during the pandemic, didn't you? That's a question.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
And you got cash for all of this. And it wasn't just 1 or 2 employees, was it? In fact, you used 8 separate federal employees on federal time using federal resources to solicit cash awards. Isn't that true?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Here they are right over my shoulder. Here's all of them. The people that you use, federal employees, so that you could go and get cash money. And the most hilarious part is that you weren't content to even dragoon them into applying for all of these cash awards. You then had them go out to the ethics agencies and ethics watchdogs and demand that you be able to get the money. You were supposed to be the nation's doctor, and you're playing one on TV, but this is what you were doing with your time. Isn't that true?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Now you're worth more than $12 million. You've got a pension that in its first year paid out north of $400,000 a year. 1 million people dead, you're getting rich. 1 million people dead, you're using federal employees to get cash awards for you. 1 million people dead, and you're here taking the fifth because you don't want to admit that what really happened in all that time was a multi-month, multi-year course of self-dealing. Isn't that true, Dr. Fauci?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Clearly, what you think today is that somehow you're above reproach. Somehow you feel like you don't need to be treated like a normal American. Can you do me a favor in the audience and stand up if during the time of the COVID pandemic, you were called a racist for calling the virus a Wuhan virus or the China virus? If you thought the 6-foot rule was total crap, if you thought the vaccine wasn't something that you should take, if you thought it was outrageous the way the mask policy was rolled out, if you were fired from your job for not taking that vaccine, including members of the military, if you thought closing schools was catastrophically stupid, and that you thought that during these times saying these things made you somehow a lesser human being. Dr. Fauci, can you just turn around and look at the people behind you? You're not willing to do that? That's not a question. It's not a question. To your lawyers, not a question. It's a request. All you have to do is look up from your lawyers and look at the people who were absolutely shamed for saying what we know now to be the truth. You can't even look at them? That's a question. Are you able to look at them? You can sit down in the audience.
While these were the most important, there were a lot of other takeaways from this. Many, many things came out. All of these things that the conspiracy theorists of this time were talking about, all of the things that were considered right-wing talking points, and all of the things that were used to divide us completely and control us more than ever before. And quite frankly, not only commit crimes against humanity, but literally perpetrate the greatest wealth transfer in American history. But I promised you that at the end I would prove to you that this was all political theater. So, watch this.
Because Dr. Fauci isn't liable for anything as long as he tells the truth, even if he admits that he destroyed records on a routine basis. His assistant said she destroyed a ton of emails. I think it was a routine thing. I think he destroyed, throughout his career, there are probably thousands of emails. Even if he did that, as long as he answered truthfully, yes, I did. I didn't think that was important. I made a mistake. You can't be prosecuted for it. Many of the things are outside the statute of limitations as well. All he had to do today, if he wanted to testify, was be honest. As long as he was honest, even about committing a crime, he would have no jeopardy. But I think the pardon has given him more immunity than most people would ever get. Like if you offer a witness immunity in exchange for testimony, he has blanket immunity. The president gave him blanket immunity for virtually anything he could have possibly done.
Kind of seems like all these people do is make you think that they're doing the things that you want them to do. And yet nothing ever actually gets done. No actual accountability is ever had. And these people continue to just do whatever they want, rob us blind, and act in the interests of themselves and any other country but America. But hey, I'm just a domestic terrorist and a science denier and a racist and a bigot and an anti-Semite and danger to society and a conspiracy theorist.